Whether you're a chestnut farmer, a food lover, or simply curious about this versatile nut, branching out with United Chestnuts is your guide to a thriving chestnut community. So join us as we explore the many branches of the chestnut tree, uncover the untold stories, and branching out together towards a sustainable future.
Well, today our guest is Amy Miller of Route 9 Co-op. And as our listeners are going to find out really quick, you are a very, very busy woman. And I appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to share some of your insights with us.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks for having me.
First thing I'm going to do is read your bio, Amy, okay? So you are the Chief Operating Officer for Route 9 Co-op, which is located in Ohio, and the owner of a diversified fruit and nut farm focusing on low input perennial foods. You're committed, obviously, to specialty crop research and continuing the family orchard legacy while focusing on long-term environmental and economic sustainability. Today, we're not going to probably dive too deep into the diversified fruit and nut business, but I'm thinking maybe you'll come back sometime next year and talk about that because there's a lot of interest in that topic right now.
Yeah, gladly. Yeah, I'm definitely dabbling in a bunch of different specialty crops, so I'd be happy to go more into that in the future.
Absolutely. Okay. We're going to start with my very favorite question because I am so excited to hear your answer about this one. What was it like to grow up on a chestnut tree farm? I'm thinking you might be one of the only people in America that had that experience.
There are a few of us, but not too many.
Yeah.
Yeah, so growing up on a chestnut farm, especially my parents' farm, I had a pretty unusual childhood, but I would say, like any kid, you just what you grow up with, you think is normal. So I didn't really realize how unusual it was till sort of later in life. In hindsight, I'm like, oh, that was kind of a weird childhood. But but it was really good. It's a really interesting environment to grow up in. Um, our farm is in Appalachian, Ohio, so we're kind of East Central Ohio, Carroll County. So it's part of the Appalachian region. It's typically sort of a blue collar community, a farming community. But my parents actually grew up in the Midwest, and so they sort of brought their Midwest culture, and they're both have a background in academia. So they're these kind of academics from the Midwest who are living in Appalachia. We're also surrounded by a large Amish community, and we've always had good relationships with them. So I actually grew up in this strangely culturally diverse environment, even though people don't think of Eastern Ohio as being particularly diverse. Yeah, and we were pretty because my parents are researchers. Research was a big part of what we do, just in our normal operations. So I also feel like I kind of grew up in a science experiment, which is fun.
I love that. Do you remember working on research when you were just a child, like being there with your parents?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I have two younger brothers as well, and they involved us in research and data collection, from as soon as we could. We were involved in farm work and research, which really, in our case, was kind of one in the same. Those things go hand in hand, and they still do. We still do a lot of research as well as our production, and so we just kind of integrate those things seamlessly. So yeah, I've always been the data collector since since I could. Yeah.
That is just so fantastic and very unique, I think. So the second question is, what sparked your interest to kind of continue in your mom and dad's footsteps,
Mhm.
specifically related to growing chestnut trees?
Yeah, that's another good question because I'm sure people can relate to this. You grow up in a certain environment, whatever your parents do, like you don't want to do that, So
Mhm.
growing up, I mean, even though we were involved in the farm operations, I never really like wanted to be a chestnut grower. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to do this when I grow up. In fact, I wanted to do anything else really. You think the grass is greener on the other side, and so actually, as soon as I turned 18, I did leave home. I did a lot of traveling. I've worked a lot of different jobs, and kind of over the course of time, I realized that, maybe the grass isn't that much greener out there. I realized that there are a lot of unique and really interesting opportunities on the chestnut farm. And it just kind of worked out that I was able to move back home. Oh, let's see, it's been about 5 years ago now, and really participate in a big way in the operations.
Yes, and I bet your dad specifically was very excited about that because it takes such a diverse skill set to run an operation like you have, and we'll share a little bit more about that in a minute. Just I know he was a guest on the podcast, and he said he never pushed you in any certain direction, but I bet he's super grateful you're back.
Yeah, it's yeah, I think so. And I'm grateful for the opportunity. I mean, not everybody has this opportunity. So that was part of it, was just sort of like realizing the opportunity that's available and sort of realizing how just incredibly silly it would be not to take advantage of that and make the most of it, you know. So yeah,
Yes.
I think he appreciates me coming back, and I appreciate what he has like sort of like set up and enabled me to come back to. Not everybody who grows up on a farm is, you know, really has a compelling reason to come back. You know, a lot of people want to
That's
get
right.
away from the farm, but there's actually something to come back to here. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm going to throw this question into just that your grandfather. You want to just do a quick summary of how everything got started, because that's interesting too.
Yeah, sure. So my grandfather, Jay Miller, he grew up in Stark County, Ohio, which is not too far from where we are in Carroll County. Um, he grew up on a dairy farm, but you know, sort of, and he had, of course, like at the time, there were a lot of kids in the family. But sort of, you know, as he grew up and he was a soldier in World War II, and when he came back home after the war, they no longer needed lots of people on the dairy farm because lots of things had become mechanized in the meantime. And I don't think he was very interested in dairy farming. Near as we can tell, he was very happy to not be a dairy farmer. um, and we're not sure what inspired him to plant trees, but he really felt strongly that the world needed more trees. And so he bought, over the course of you know, my dad's childhood, my grandfather bought two farms in Carroll County, which had been dairy farms that were abandoned. They had gone out of business, very poor soils. And he just like covered those farms in trees, and he
Yeah.
planted a lot of different nut trees. And he was actually really interested in walnuts at the time. That was kind of a time when English walnuts or Persian walnuts were sort of a trendy thing for people to grow. So he planted a bunch of those, but they just didn't do well in our area. But the chestnuts thrived. And once he saw that, then he started planting more and more chestnuts. So yeah, it was kind of for him, it was a hobby or sort of like a life passion. And it's just kind of like grown and grown beyond his hobby to what it is today.
Yeah, fantastic. Do you know if, like, did you guys ever remember him saying that he ate chestnuts as a child?
I don't know about that. I'm sure my dad could say. I know that like they had chestnuts in their backyard. They lived in Canton, Ohio.
Okay.
That's where my dad and his siblings grew up, and then they would come down on the weekends to the farms in Carroll County. But I remember my dad saying they had chestnut trees in their backyard and they would eat them. But I don't know if like my grandfather grew up eating chestnuts on his farm.
Okay. Okay, good. I'm just so curious because there's such a lack of awareness of the
Mhm.
chestnut product with the average American consumer, and hopefully we're gonna change that a little bit.
I sort of wonder, I don't know, I mean, this is just speculation, but I wonder if he was exposed to chestnuts when he was in Europe during the war.
I
That
bet you're
might have been,
right.
yeah, that might have been where he was introduced to the idea of eating
Yeah.
chestnuts.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Dr. Sandy is going, a little bit of a segue, but Dr. Sandy is going to join us on the podcast, talking a little bit about the history of the chestnut tree in America. And that's a good segue to say that when I told you that I wanted to create kind of a spotlight of women leading the chestnut movement per se, you said, yeah, that would be great to contribute, but also wanted to recognize that the Northern Nut Growers Association has always supported the involvement of women, men and women, to be honest. And I know you're in a leadership role there. So just what are your thoughts on why people should take the time to come to organizations and financially support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, there's kind of maybe a misconception out there that whatever you need to know, you can just find it on the internet or even, you know, read it in a book if you're that old fashioned. um, but there's really no substitute for that kind of like peer-to-peer connection you get at grower meetings. The Northern Nut Growers has been around for over 100 years and has been connecting people from academia, you know, commercial growers, hobbyists, all these people from these sort of different backgrounds really blend together seamlessly at NNGA meetings. And everyone's united around this kind of common enthusiasm for nut trees. And it has been the case, I think, since the inception of the organization. Yeah, and it's near as I can tell from what I've read and heard, it's always been a very egalitarian organization. Whoever's into nut trees is welcome to join and participate and be in leadership or whatever. It's a little different. I've been involved with some other sort of industry groups where things are, people are a little more cliquey, and only certain people are allowed and certain to do certain things. But the NNGA seems to be a very welcoming group, and just the amount you can learn in such a short period of time from interacting with a few people at grower meetings is really, there's no substitute for it. So I think anyone who's interested in growing nut trees really should come to the meeting, should support the organization. It just, it's that connection and also the continuity of knowledge over a very long period of time. So yeah, like I said, there's just no
Yes.
substitute for it.
Yeah, and the presentations too. There's some really good information and data of what's happening on different facets of the business, and the Chestnut Growers Association too, which is kind of a combined event. I know that oftentimes at these meetings, your dad specifically, there'll be lines of people waiting to speak with him, and probably you too. And he's just so, well, both of you are just so kind to share when you can. You're busy though. That's the thing. People, I know you mentioned somewhere that you're just very busy and out in the field and in production and doing research. And so to take phone calls from people that think it's a good idea to explore chestnuts, that's not always possible. And that's one of the reasons we kind of have started this.
Yeah. I mean, we do our best to talk to people. That's something we both enjoy doing. But I do know sometimes things get a little backed up and people want to get in touch with us and they can't. And that's just, we try to talk to everybody, but it's not always possible. But yeah, if you come to the meetings, that's a great way to connect with us and then with other people who are also very busy, but have carved out that window of time to connect with growers and future growers. So yeah,
For sure.
yep.
We're going to need to get you a Slack channel. People
Yeah.
can just ping your phone.
Mm.
Okay, this is another topic. You're very smart, and I would like you to share a little bit about your academic journey and how you see your education now. Just finished your doctorate, I believe, is helping you now and in the future, and others as well.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. So like I mentioned before, I sort of grew up within this kind of somewhat academic experimental environment where, and I've always been familiar with kind of the research process, data collection, scientific process. So I have that background in academia, but as I mentioned, I really didn't want agriculture was not something I was particularly interested in. I've always been really interested in like nature and ecology, and so I wanted to be more of like a field biologist. And so I actually went to school at Ohio State for environmental science. That was my bachelor's degree. I did some research in soil science when I was there and actually looked at the soil parameters that affected the growth and survival of chestnuts on reclaimed mine land. So I was kind of interested in that soil environment. Got my master's degree at Purdue. I studied forest biology there. Purdue has a strong program in forestry, and they like to try to incorporate chestnuts in reforestation, whether it's hybrids or Americans or whatever. So there's kind of that sort of forestry approach was what I had at Purdue, and I looked at the naturalization of Chinese chestnuts into a North American forest. And then I sort of, a few years passed. I ended up coming back to the farm, and that's when I started my PhD. And I started my PhD specifically to look at this kind of emerging issue we were having with this disease, which we have named chestnut anthracnose. You'll see it in the literature sometimes as blossom end rot. And so that was I was able to pursue that research specifically in response to this emerging issue we've been seeing. And a plant pathologist at Ohio State University, Dr. Melanie Ivy, was interested in this topic as well and took me on as her graduate student. And throughout the course of that research, really, I learned a lot about fungal ecology and the different types of fungi that are living in the orchards and amongst the chestnut trees. So even though that was a specific project about this disease, I learned a lot about ecology there. So I sort of have been like working in parallel. I haven't been studying agriculture specifically, but through these different sort of ecology studies, I've learned a lot of things that are very useful for chestnut growing, and this kind of integration of ideas between ecology and forestry and agricultural production, especially in orchards. So the things I've learned in academia are very helpful. Meanwhile, kind of like previously, my father has studied tree breeding and genetics as that's his academic background, which is huge for trying to select and improve chestnut trees to grow on our sites with, that are well adapted, need less inputs, are more productive. And I think, collectively, we're all very interested in low input agriculture that improves the landscape. So we want to produce food and, maintain ecological integrity at the same time. And I think we're achieving that in our operation. We're always looking for ways to improve, but I think we're doing, as good as we can with the knowledge we have and resources at the moment. And we're going to continue to look for ways to maintain ecological integrity and have a food production system. And I guess, along with this question, I just wanted to say that, a strong academic background is not required to do what we do. My grandfather barely finished high school. I don't think he was a very good student, probably had a learning disability that now we would diagnose, at the time was not diagnosed. Anyway, he was not an academic person, but a very astute and observant person. And when I am making farm management decisions, I actually rely a lot on some of the wisdom he has passed down. So, the academic background is very helpful to what we do, but certainly, being on the land and observing things and just being a good scientist, even if you're not trained as a scientist, is pretty important, is critical to this whole operation.
Absolutely. A couple questions. One is your thesis available to read? I bet that's fascinating.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it should be available. I think probably if you do like a Google Scholar search, it should be publicly available. I haven't actually tried to look it up myself. But
Okay,
we might
I'll
be able to
look.
come up with a link to that if you want.
Yeah, we will. Second is, would you describe low input?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, low input, basically that's a very sort of generic nondescript term just to mean that we want to basically make as few inputs as possible. We want to set up our orchard in such a way that, the trees kind of grow themselves and there's sort of natural nutrient cycling. We want to set up the orchard like an ecosystem that also we can harvest food from. And so,
Okay.
this is sort of in contrast to high input modern grain agriculture where, there's like a heavy-handed site prep. There's a lot of equipment involved. There's a lot of inputs, fertilizer, pesticides, that sort of thing. There's just sort of like constant inputs that need to be made throughout the growing season to produce a harvestable crop. So we want to sort of minimize our inputs and set up the trees to be as healthy as they can be and be as productive as they can be. So we can just sort of step back and let that system function without a lot of intervention.
Yes. Okay. That's good. Let me go to the questions here. Well, one thing I wanted to comment on is that I appreciate you talking about the requirement for academic knowledge that because we have people like you in the industry that can help, but I at the end of the day, I think you're so right. It comes down to trying things yourself, observing, networking and connecting, reading. Like there are so many things that someone that doesn't have a PhD can do to still, be successful.
Mm.
Um, so thank you for that. The next question is, what are the main goals for, I guess, Route 9, right? Because Empire is your farm, but you've kind of morphed over into Route 9. That's where people can reach you more prevalently.
Mm. Yeah, maybe I'll just clarify that. So,
Yes.
so Route 9 is a cooperative that's made up of many different member farms, and Empire Chestnut Company is one of the member farms of Route 9 Cooperative. And it's sort of almost the parent of all this. I mean, Empire Chestnut Company has been around since well, my dad founded the company in the mid 80s. The trees have been growing since probably the 50s, but the company's been around since the 80s. And then in 2010, between Empire Chestnut Company and several other neighbors and other growers in the region, we decided it would make sense to form a cooperative. So Route 9 Cooperative is kind of the umbrella, under which there are many different member farms.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting. I asked Greg, how did he come up with the name? He goes, "Oh, it's the street."
Yeah.
I love
Right.
it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
it's Empire Chestnut Company is it's on Empire Road. And then when the
yeah,
question came up of like, what do we name the co-op? It's like, well, it's on Route 9. Let's call it Route 9 Cooperative.
that's so great.
I do want to point out that when the neighbors, Greg and his neighbors formed the co-op, they very intentionally called it Route 9 Cooperative and not Route 9 Chestnut Cooperative, because they wanted to be open to other types of crops and things, using the facility throughout the season for different things. So Route 9 Co-op, it was sort of founded out of necessity for aggregating production and marketing for chestnuts. But the idea is beyond chestnuts. The idea is, if this can be a processing and marketing hub for different types of specialty crop agriculture in the region. So the
Yes,
focus was really on providing opportunities for Appalachian landowners to, find ways to make their soil, prosper and profitable beyond sort of the conventional row crop agriculture or livestock, which are kind of the two main things around here. And in Appalachia, row crop agriculture is just not nearly as productive or successful as in the Midwest. So, we see opportunities for other types of crops that actually can thrive here, that aren't sort of those more conventional types of farms. And so the co-op is meant to be that hub, that kind of aggregation and marketing hub for different types of specialty crop agriculture that can be grown, specifically in Appalachia, but we're not opposed to members outside of Appalachia.
yes, no, and I had never heard that part, but it makes so much sense. As we see more and more growers coming online and such, I just wrote down a couple of companies that are looking to create co-ops because it does need to be somewhat geographical, wouldn't you say? Like
It makes sense. There's definitely there's a cost every time you move things around, right? So
yes,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean
in
there are,
time.
yeah, it's not that we do have a couple growers who are somewhat distant, but it can make sense. For example, if they bring their, whole truckload of crop to us, that's different than them coming like every week with a few buckets. So
Yes.
yeah, it can be economical depending on the scale.
Yes. Well, so I was just going to share, like, so obviously United Chestnuts, we're here in central Kentucky. That's our plan. Joel Hubbard and his family with Georgia Chestnuts. So that you think of that kind of hub. Brad and Sandy Russell with Chestnuts in the Ozarks. And then Ken Evans and his family, Texas Chestnuts. And those are just a handful of people that I know that see the vision of what your team has accomplished and say, maybe we can do this, not going in naive, but just really working each step along the way. And that's exciting for the overall industry, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. The cooperative model works really well for this type of crop. And I think a lot of specialty crops. So I'm glad that that's kind of, a popular model throughout the different parts of the Eastern US.
Yes. And I didn't mention Russ with Bread Tree Farms
Mhm.
is up in New York, I believe. And then also, of course, Roger Blackwell and the Chestnut Growers Inc. in Michigan, which has a number of farms. So anyone that's listening that's thinking, gosh, could I have a small farm and what would I have to do all of this? Not necessarily, right? That there could be co-ops that would take care of the production and the marketing and the sales and all that stuff. So it'll
Absolutely.
be
Yeah. Yeah. The co-op really lowers the barrier to entry for new growers because the co-op can provide all that processing and marketing infrastructure. So yeah, I would definitely encourage new growers, especially smaller growers, to see who's in your area and see if, who you might be able to team up with to do this together. Because that's, we wouldn't, the 5 or 6 of us wouldn't all be doing this independently. We're doing it because we're doing it together.
Yes, absolutely. And it might just be worth mentioning the size and the scope of what Route 9 is about. I mean, we're not talking, like you said, buckets full. We're talking 200,000 pounds or so a year. Is that about right?
We're more like 100,000 pounds a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
200 on
Yeah.
a good year.
Yeah, yeah. 200 is our, I don't think we've ever quite gotten there yet, but that's we've estimated that is like the maximum capacity of our facility. So
Okay.
if we get to
Yes.
200,000 pounds, we might need to rethink our infrastructure here a little bit.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So next is it. I just think it'd be fascinating to hear from you, kind of like the annual cycle. How do things go from January to December?
Mhm. Yeah, I think if it's okay with you, I'll start in the fall with harvest. It's kind of,
Yes.
it's a cycle, so it's kind of hard to know like where to start. But harvest is definitely like a very like discrete and distinct time of year. So I'll start with that. We typically harvest, the harvest begins in mid-September and lasts until mid to late October, just to kind of depending on the weather. Um, we sort of are processing and shipping culinary chestnuts from October through November. We're typically done shipping the culinary nuts by late November. Sometimes it goes into early December, just depending on the crop load that year. Meanwhile, during the harvest season, we also harvest seed nuts. And so those are the ones that we are going to either plant ourselves or sell for other people to plant. And the seed nuts will typically hold in storage and we will begin shipping them kind of after the main wave of culinary nuts. So that's typically beginning in November and we'll ship sort of throughout the late fall and the winter, again, depending on availability and when customers want them. Um, Sort of after we finish or sort of simultaneously as we're finishing the culinary nut processing, we're also drying our grade B chestnuts, which we then peel and turn into our dried products like chestnut flour. And so we typically start drying them, as we grade the fresh chestnuts, we put the grade B chestnuts into the dryer. So we're kind of drying them throughout October and November. We'll often start peeling the chestnuts in maybe late November, early December, and we'll peel sort of throughout the winter. We have a milling partner now who does a lot of our flour milling, a local company, which is very nice to have that partnership. And so we like to get all of our milling finished in the winter months, for a couple reasons, but mainly because it's low humidity. It's much easier to store the nuts and the flour in those cooler conditions. So um, we like to have our dried products more or less finished, in the January to March range. So then, meanwhile, in winter, we're also starting to plant our seeds for our nursery crop in the next year. We start all of our seeds indoors in greenhouses, and we'll plant in February. Yeah, usually around in February. Start everything in the greenhouses. Those little nursery trees stay indoors until like mid-May or so, and then we'll actually bring them outside and transplant them into the outdoor nursery where they'll stay throughout the growing season. To be dug up, either a few we'll dig in the fall, but mostly we dig the following spring.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so then also in March, we're digging our last year's nursery crop and packing and selling them. So these different things, seasons kind of blend, one into another. Um, and we're typically done digging, packing, and shipping our nursery trees by the end of May. We don't like to really go into June because it's people can still plant, but then they have to water more. It's yeah, just it's easier to have that all wrapped up by May. Um, there's I would say a little bit of a lull in the summer, where it's not quite so chaotic, but we're starting to kind of like get our orchards prepped for the harvest season. And our orchard prep is fairly minimal. We do some light pruning typically. We used to do all of our pruning in the summer. Since we've had issues with oak wilt recently, now we've switched to try to do more pruning in the winter. If we do summer pruning, we try to coat the tree wounds so that the beetles that bring the disease, the fungal spores, aren't attracted to those tree wounds. We're still trying to figure out how to, what's our routine now with this oak wilt issue that we've been having. Um, anyway, then, we don't do a lot of orchard mowing compared to other growers. We actually don't mow until August. And we'll mow in late August and then again sort of in September, right before the harvest season, to get that nice like golf course lawn that we can harvest chestnuts from. Um, and then we also we do spray for chestnut weevils typically in mid to late August into early September. Depending on how we perceive the weevil pressure, we may spray anywhere between 1 and 4 times throughout the season for the weevils. And then we're back to harvest again in September.
It starts again. How do you spray? Like what equipment do you use?
We have always used just like an orchard air blast sprayer.
Okay.
And the challenge with that, of course, is the spray needs to actually coat the crown of the tree. Like ideally, if you could just spray the burrs, that's really what you need to do. So, the air blast sprayer works, but I think there's a lot of wasted spray material and it's kind of difficult. We have within the last year been experimenting with drone spraying.
Yeah, okay. I was wondering about that.
Yeah. There's a drone spray applicator who actually lives in the area. He came last year. We did one of our orchards. We sort of divided in half, sprayed half with the drone, half with the tractor. And then we did spot checks and compared weevil incidents between those two areas. And we saw no difference. So we're going to start moving much more toward the drone spraying, assuming the logistics all work out, because it's faster, it's actually cheaper, and we use way less spray material than with the tractor.
Yes, you sound like a researcher there. Did A/B testing.
Mm-hmm. I'm the 3rd generation chestnut grower here, which is like, you don't really find that. There aren't many people in the US that can say that. Yeah. So like you can note little things, or if it's like like a rainy day, nobody picked that day because of rain. So make little notes just so we can kind of keep track of it. So this whole farm started as it was actually my grandfather's hobby. So my grandfather grew up on a dairy farm, but apparently he hated dairy farming. He really wanted to buy old dairy farms that were going out of business and plant trees on them. And that's what he did. He found these relatively cheap farms for sale, 2 farms in Carroll County, Ohio. And he planted a whole variety of nut trees. And he noticed the chestnuts were doing really well. So then he thought, okay, well, we're just going to plant more chestnuts. This was all happening like as my dad was growing up. So he and my dad kind of were both into nut trees. My dad, Greg, got into it in more of the academic sense. He went to school for forestry and tree genetics, tree breeding. He was the one that decided to really make it a commercial business.
This was a crop that actually improved the soil over time versus a lot of the row crops, especially here in Appalachia where we got really poor soil to begin with and highly erodible soil. The row crops rapidly deplete the soil. We mine the organic matter and then there's not much left. But with the chestnuts on the land, we reverse the whole process and we convert what old field soil back into a forest type soil. Started out as my dad's hobby that just got out of control and became a business.
His idea was also like economic development for Appalachia, because we're in Appalachian, Ohio. It's traditionally like a really extractive economy, right? I mean, like they came and cleared the timber and people made money on that. They came and mined the coal, now it's fracking, right? So it's like this land use history is so extractive. So, his whole idea of the chestnut business was let's enrich the land rather than just keep taking things away from it. So it's totally like a multi-generational process of like listening to the land and then figuring out how to make it work economically. We're driving to Orchard 3 right now, which is a Coleridge orchard, and that's one of our family orchards. We're driving past 2 other landowners, and these were trees that are actually seedlings from the older trees in the Coleridge orchard. So it's like the whole tree family is here. This is the oldest orchard that we have in production right now. Most of these were planted in 1972. And most of these were seedlings from the best stuff that my grandfather planted in 1965. So he had an older planting, then he selected the seeds from the best stuff and then planted them here. And then we've collected the best seeds from this stuff and planted them elsewhere. So we've got several generations of trees here, among our various co-op orchards. When my grandfather first bought this land, it was more or less cleared and it was a dairy farm and it was more or less pasture, but there were some remnant woodlots around and there actually were American chestnuts here when he bought this property. So this is a site that formerly had American chestnuts and they were dying and they've all since died out. But this is land that was once occupied by the American chestnut. So the American chestnut was a native species to this area, to pretty much the whole eastern U.S., and was a pretty important species as far as wildlife food and habitat. Commonly used for timber and tannins for tanning leather. So there were American chestnut was once a really ecologically and economically important tree in this area. There was a blight that was introduced. It's a invasive fungus from Asia, and it turns out that the American chestnut had no resistance to it. It just totally fell prey to this disease and just wiped out entire populations of chestnut trees throughout the range. So with the loss of the American chestnut really changed the forest. So it was very devastating. And now we grow these trees with Asian genetics, Chinese chestnut trees or hybrids. We mostly grow Chinese chestnuts for the nut quality, but they are resistant to the blight. So we can grow these here now. They will get blight cankers. You might see some trees with some dead branches or cankerous areas, but they heal. They don't actually die from it. What you're seeing here is a few things to look at. So this nut has a little bit lighter color. This is just not quite fully ripe yet. So it might have fallen a bit early, might have got blown out by the wind. But yeah, this is what they look like when they're not quite all the way ripe. But this will still be a good nut. This, with this black tip, you can see the difference between the brown natural color and this black lesion on the shell. This is blossom end rot, also called chestnut anthracnose, because it affects the kernel, but it also affects the shell and the twigs. So this is kind of a complicated fungal disease that these get. This fungus affects the shell too and makes these kind of tannish brown spots. And this may or may not affect the kernel. So sometimes you can open these up and the kernel's perfectly fine on the inside, and other times there's a little brown spot on the kernel. So this is another case where, on the grading line we would pick these out and dry and peel these because we just don't know if they're good or not. But once you peel them, then you know. So a lot of nuts with these shell lesions end up in the flower because the kernel's fine. You just can't tell by looking at the outside if it's okay or not. Yeah, so when our pickers come out here after they check in at the red building, they come out here and just pick wherever they can find. And we set up these bucket stations throughout the orchard so that they're never too far from a bucket. And then once they finish picking, we ask them to gather their buckets back at the bucket station so it's easier for us to find and collect. You can tell these are from a couple different trees. And this is different than this tree, different than this tree. If you have decent teeth, you can just crack into it. And you can see, so there's the yellow kernel, there's the skin called the pellicle, and then there's the shell. And these peel pretty easily. And you get this nice bright yellow kernel. Tree bread. Botanically, it's a nut, but nutritionally it's like a grain. You can dry it, you can make flour out of it, you can make, pasta or pancakes or those types of things. Or you can treat it more like a carrot, like a vegetable. You can, boil it, sort of mash it, put it in some sort of veggie mix. We do hand harvest out of necessity. It's basically because there's not a machine available, but in the end, yeah, through that you realize what a value it is, a community experience. And most of our pickers are local. We have several Amish communities in the area, and so the Amish will come harvest for us. We have a lot of Amish pickers. groups can come harvest as fundraisers. So we'll have like various like church groups or school groups or people who are trying to raise money for whatever will come and harvest and use it as like their group fundraiser. So there's that community aspect to it as well. Once things come into the packing house, our processing includes cleaning. They go up this conveyor belt. There's a big fan. Any like grass, twigs, debris that come in the bucket is just blown outside. Clean nuts fall down into like a roller sizer. So this sizer spins the chestnuts around in a spiral, and there's holes of different sizes, and the nuts drop out whenever they fit through those sized holes. We'll take each bin, we'll give it a hot water treatment. So the hot water bath, it does two things. One is it kills the chestnut weevils. Any weevil larvae that might be inside or weevil eggs, it kills them. And it's also just like a clean, like a sanitation step. The hot water bath is about approximately 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and we hold the nuts at temperature for about 5 minutes. Our goal is to kill the weevils, clean the shells, but not cook the chestnuts. Them, we basically like send them over a roller table. We have a crew of 4 people that sit there and just pick out the bad ones. And so we bag them into mostly 25-pound bags. Some are in 10 or 5-pound bags, just depending on what customers order. The cull nuts, these were ones that were picked out on the grading line. Those are the ones that we dry and peel and turn into flour. Once they're dry enough to peel, we have a peeling machine. We kind of vibrate one at a time into this rifling tube. They shoot through the tube and hit against like a wooden bang board. When they're dry, that cracks the shell, and the kernel falls down onto a roller table where we can then grate it again. And then anything that's like good, like the flour nuts and the dried kernels, then we'll package and sell those. We start packing and shipping chestnuts typically the first week of October. We sell almost everything online retail. Wholesale, like we will sell to some retail markets in the area. There's a lot of like apple orchards that will buy from us. We formed the co-op and built the building in 2010. That was after like the 2009 harvest. That was the big harvest that we couldn't handle in our smaller facility. So this building was built and we formed the cooperative. And basically, cooperative is a member-owned structure.
Cooperative model works really well for chestnuts for a couple reasons. Expensive capital investments that need to be made, like in a processing facility and cold storage. It means that the grower doesn't have to pay for those. This provides a way that even a grower who's got maybe 5 or 10 acres of chestnuts could become part of a co-op. We take advantage of the economy of scale. We're kind of hovering around 100,000 pounds per year. Plus, a lot of growers don't like the idea of having to market. And so the co-op handles the marketing, and then the growers can focus on growing, and that usually works out well.
So hopefully this system can perpetuate now, beyond any one person or one family's ambitions. Like this is a bigger thing now than just like a family farm.
Well, I love this, and I think listeners hearing how a cycle works. I know we are in a very similar environment, but smaller and newer at it. But it's a lot of work, and it seems like it never stops. But I was thinking, you know, it sounds overwhelming and exhausting, but if you're passionate about it, which you guys are, and we are, and many are, it's really just filled with joy and a sense of accomplishment and keeps your brain functioning because you got to figure so many things out, don't you think?
Totally. Well, it's an attitude thing, right? I mean, that's kind of like with any farm work. Like, yeah, it is hard work. And if you are constantly thinking about, oh, this is so hard, I'm toiling, you're never going to enjoy it, But you got
Yeah,
to find it's got to bring you joy at some level, or you're just going to be grumpy and exhausted all the time.
exactly.
We're fortunate that we do have um some people in the area who help us out. We've got some great employees. Um, and people who are kind of into what we do. We have interns every fall to help us with harvest. There's some seasonal employees who really enjoy the harvest season and will come help us out. So we've got a good group of people that are working with us. And we do our best to just like make it a joyful experience and not try to like dwell in like the toil aspect of it, right? It doesn't have to be toil.
Yes, for sure. And, in my full-time career, I travel quite a bit to big cities, and you just look at all those people there that have kind of lost touch with living close to the land and raising things and even having it be a revenue stream. Like that was our forefathers. That's what they did. And I think there's a resurgence of people wanting to do that. And it's fun for all of us that are involved in this to be able to help in one way or another to accomplish their dreams.
Mm. And
Um,
it's fun. I mean, there's always something new to see. It's like, okay, it sounds like you just are doing the same things over and over again, but every year it's a little different, right? You had like the weather conditions are different. There's different things happening in the environment. I mean, and you have to kind of pay attention and make so many little changes and adjustments that it really, like you said, it kind of keeps your brain active and there is always something new to see, even though on paper it can look like you're just doing the same thing over and over again.
yeah, we all know better. Um, so I said in the beginning that I wanted to revisit your work with fruit and nut as a product, but could you just give us kind of a high level of how you're working to advance chestnuts in products and what are some of the highlights of that work?
Sure. Yeah, I think the thing that we've always been really interested in sort of these value-added chestnut products. My dad started drying and peeling chestnuts and figuring out how to make flour in the mid 90s. And it was kind of a small scale thing. It didn't really take off in popularity, but I would say in recent years, the chestnut flour has really become popular. And in fact, we're now selling out of chestnut flour very quickly. We produce a pretty small quantity of it, really. Like I said, we sort of take our grade B cull nuts, we dry them, we peel them, we grade them again. A lot of times they're nuts that have they're small or they have like really some issues with the shell, but they're okay inside. So those we use those for flour. Anyway, so the flour is a small aspect of our business, but it's really growing in popularity. We have been fortunate in recent years to work on a SARE grant with Rural Action. It's kind of like a Appalachian Support and Economic Development nonprofit in Southern Ohio. And so we've worked to sort of look at some milling techniques for chestnuts, and we've also explored culinary uses for the flour. We've worked with different bakeries, breweries, ice cream makers to look at what can be done with chestnut flour, all the different things that can be done with chestnuts, with dried or dried chestnuts or chestnut flour. And so, we had some great results from that. It was fun to taste test all the different things that came out of it. Got some good partnerships now from that project. So yeah, we see a lot of potential for chestnut flour and dried chestnut products. But there are still some major production challenges that we need to overcome to really scale up the dried products aspect of what we do.
Yeah, and one question is, if you're selling out of your culinary nuts for, higher price, and then but you want to use them to make flour, is the revenue differential very much? Like, do you say why should we put these into flour when we can sell them for more money as a culinary nut?
You're absolutely right about that. And that's why our flour production is so low, is we basically there is zero economic incentive for us to convert high quality fresh culinary nuts into dry products. I mean the profit margin on the fresh chestnuts is so much bigger. And
Yeah.
so people ask that all the time. They say, well, we only have a small amount of flour, and they're saying, well, why can't you make more? Can you just divert some of your fresh nuts into flour? And it's just that the numbers don't work.
Yes. And so if we see kind of this increase in in demand, um and an increase in supply, I mean, I'm sorry about that. Are you making sure you're okay there?
Fine, yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Mm.
That if as more growers come on board and there's a more supply, then maybe that's going to be one of the avenues, is a little bit more product to go towards these products like flour and beer and things like that. Who
Yeah.
knows? But
Yeah, I think there's potential. And I know there are some growers out there who want to grow chestnuts specifically for flour. And
yes,
I think it can be done. It's just there's some of the, processing step to work out to scale it up. But I think it's possible. It's just we're not at that point yet. We need a few different innovations in our processing stream to make it very economical.
yeah, and isn't that fun that everything's not figured out yet? It gives us things to figure out, and I personally think that's a highlight.
Mhm.
Recently I shared a blog that got kind of a lot of attention, and it was suggesting that the chestnut industry could duplicate what happened in the pistachio industry, as far as something that was relatively unknown coming up to the forefront and being Super Bowl commercials. Do you see the potential, say the next 10 years, for the chestnut to really, as a consumer product, make a big comeback?
Yeah, I think it can. I think there are a couple things that make me pause from that concept. One is that the supply has to kind of like go lockstep with the demand. One of
Yes.
the issues we've had, and in fact, this is an issue we're having right now with the dry products, is we've done these projects, we've increased interest in chestnut flour, but we don't have the supply. So
Yeah.
people lose interest, right? You're like, hey, check this out. This is a great product. They're like, yeah, I want to buy 1,000 pounds. I'm like, sorry, don't have them,
Yes.
So I think
Because you
like,
guys sell out of most of your products and nuts, most years, don't you?
yeah, we sell out of everything.
Yes.
We don't get very much sympathy when I complain about how we sell out and we don't have any product left. But it actually is a stressful thing.
Yes.
And anyone who is growing chestnuts or will be getting into that situation, when you have to disappoint customers, it's really hard,
Yes.
So I worry about seeing chestnuts becoming marketed and popularized, but they're not being chestnuts available to people, and sort of like the awkwardness that creates in these like grower customer relationships. Um,
Yes, I agree. I mean, we're on the smaller scales right now still, but we sell out every year, and I'm in sales, I'm like, well, what the heck?
right. Well, yeah. I mean, we're like our team, my dad and pretty much everyone who's involved in our co-op, we are not salesmen, we are not marketers, like none of us that's our background, none of us particularly want to do that. And yet we are successful anyway because our product is in such demand. So, we're in a fortunate spot where we don't have to have a sales team. But I know that people like you, there's plenty of people out there who are good at that and who want to do that. And I think there is a time and place for that, but yeah, I think the production needs to match the marketing push.
Yes,
And
agreed.
the other thing that, concerns me about the idea of, kind of like this chestnut pistachio comparison, is that chestnuts are, um, they're sort of a fickle product. They have a shelf life. I think they're a very seasonal type of food. Other types of nuts that can be dried and packaged, and they can be enjoyed year round much more easily because they're
Yeah.
much easier to process and store. And chestnuts are, I mean, they're really more like fresh mushrooms or something. They're almost like, I guess in my mind, they're a seasonal treat, not necessarily a snack you're going to have year round. And so I think when we're marketing chestnuts, we should kind of manage expectations around seasonality and availability of the crop, just because even if we can dry them, it's a whole different world than other nuts.
Yes. And I've always said I think it needs to be an experience. It's an experience in November to be roasting, but not just roasting, this just have it as an ingredient that is in things. But even if we got a 50% increase in people roasting chestnuts over the fire, that would help all the new growers coming on board sell out, because there's just such a fraction of the people that do that when I travel, I ask everybody, and a lot of times they'll say, well, yeah, sometimes we go to New York and they have them on the streets. Like, okay, we have
Yeah.
our work cut out for us, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah, I
fun.
agree. That making it that experience, and yeah, that kind of seasonal tie, I think that's a really good approach.
Okay. Well, let's go to a more negative subject, which is, what are some of the significant challenges that you are facing, or you maybe even more, what can some of the newer growers expect to face as they get into this without being naive, let's say?
Right. Yeah, I'll start with advice to new growers, and anyone who has called my dad and talked to him on the phone. The first question he asks is, "What's your soil type?" What is your site like? And really, for growing chestnuts, site selection is such a critical component. Um, it really, it's amazing to me. I've seen chestnuts growing on a variety of sites, a variety of conditions, and it's really amazing that if you plant chestnut trees in really suitable soils and like a really suitable climate, your management work is pretty minimal. I mean, the trees are healthy, they thrive, they do really well. If you put the trees where they're happy, as the farmer, there's really not a lot you need to do. But if you try to grow chestnuts off-site, just the amount of like pest and disease pressure and just like challenges that you face, having to replace chestnuts that died because they got waterlogged or whatever. I mean, it's just a big difference in the workload and the stress load for the farmer trying to grow them in a good site versus a marginal site. So I would encourage anybody who can, you know, um, find that ideal site for your chestnut trees and just save yourself so much hassle down the road. And if you have a site that is really not a good chestnut site, plant something else. I mean, there are
Yeah.
plenty of like very great crops out there, tree crops and shrubs and stuff that'll grow in places where chestnuts don't thrive. It's totally okay to grow, I would encourage people to like grow what thrives in their soil. Don't try to like force something to grow in an area where it's not going to thrive.
Yes. And if someone asked you or your dad, like, well, how do I know what's the best soil? Because everyone asks this. What's your answer?
Yeah. Well-drained soil is key. Now there are lots of, so the literature and what you'll read, what people say, well-drained sandy soil, a pH 6.5 or below. That's kind of the textbook answer. And that is not wrong. You will find these kind of rare circumstances of chestnuts that are thriving in something that we think is a site that's a bit off. And so I think we don't really understand the whole picture of what exactly makes a chestnut tree thrive. But we do know that the trees will do well in well-drained sandy loam soil, a pH below 6.5.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, Buzz Ferber was a guest on the podcast. He really likes you, by the way, Amy. And
It's feelings mutual.
yeah, okay, good. He said at the end of the day, if you've planted trees and they're growing great and they're producing chestnuts, you did something right.
Right.
You know, sometimes it doesn't have to be this huge academic, process. It's better if you do, but there's people that have trees planted, and that's one sign is if your trees are doing well, then you might be in good shape.
Oh yeah, yeah. The trees will tell you if you've got
Yes.
a good plant or not. But I guess it's just, I hate to see people make the big investment and then have poor plantings or failed plantings, So if you want to play around, if that's like, if you don't necessarily need to have like a good return on your investment and you want to play around, great. But if you're trying to make a production orchard and you need to expect a certain revenue within a certain time, then paying attention to your soil is really important, and you probably want to be safe and not try to push it if that like revenue stream, quick revenue stream is important to you.
Yes, absolutely. Um, okay, so let's see here. Kind of talked about this, but just what's Amy Miller's current state of the chestnut industry in America? That's a big question.
That is a big question. I'll I'll try to give you a somewhat concise answer. I mean it is really remarkable to me how many new chestnut orchards are being planted throughout the eastern US, and just kind of this like swell of enthusiasm for chestnuts that we've seen in recent years. Again, growing up on the chestnut farm, most of my life people have never heard of chestnuts, or if I say I'm a chestnut grower, like what's that?
Mhm.
Even amongst other like tree crops farmers, chestnut growing has never really been taken seriously as like an agricultural crop. So it's really fun to see that changing, and to see, especially with like the agroforestry movement, to
Yep.
see chestnuts being, I guess, taken seriously as an agricultural crop. Um, and I appreciate that there is a lot of enthusiasm and collaboration around chestnuts. Those of us who have been growing chestnuts for a long time have always been very collaborative. I mean, we have good relationships with a lot of other growers. We talk at meetings, but also, I mean, we talk all the, if we need something or have a question, we'll call each other up like, hey, I'm seeing this problem in my orchard. Have you seen this? Or like, hey, I need more chestnuts. Do you have any? So we've always been very collaborative. And I guess I hope that we can continue to be that kind of enthusiastic, collaborative industry as more and more orchards come online, and we see like what happens next for with all these new orchards that are being planted.
Yes, that's a great answer. There's another question I didn't share before, but you'll know the answer is when we're talking about culinary nuts to consumers that maybe haven't bought them before, is there a difference in the tree that the nuts come from? Are they mixed up? Or I know for seed nuts, we identify, but for culinary nuts, should people be concerned about mixing different types of nuts from different cultivars or seedlings of known cultivars, etc.?
So we grow, for our culinary nut production, we primarily grow Chinese chestnuts, and we have seedling orchards. And so, every tree we're harvesting from is a unique individual. But we mix them all together when we harvest, and we sell them by size. So it doesn't
Okay.
necessarily matter what tree they're from, but they get sorted and sold by size. And so
Yes.
if you have a Chinese chestnut orchard where all those nuts are pretty similar, they absolutely can be mixed. It's not a problem. I think you'll get into trouble if you want to try to mix different species or hybrids. If you were growing Euro-Japanese hybrids and Chinese chestnuts, you wouldn't want to mix those things for your consumers. You would want to keep them separate because the sizes and flavors and handling are a little different between those different species.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're growing all Euro-Japanese hybrids, maybe you can mix them up, but I think between species, keep them separate and manage expectations a little differently. But if you're growing all Chinese, from all Chinese parents, go for it, mix them up, they should be
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. What's the most popular size?
Hmm. Interestingly enough, it's the medium size. There's a weird mismatch between what producers or breeders think we need and what the consumers are actually demanding. There's a lot of push for large nut size, and there sort of has historically been a push for larger nuts. I think the idea being, well, it's more economical because it's easier to get a pound of chestnuts if they're large than if they're small. A lot of our customers are East Asian, so they're either first generation Chinese Americans or recent immigrants from China. A lot of our customers tend to perceive those smaller nuts as sweeter or more flavorful. And so actually there is really good demand for smaller size nuts.
Okay.
So, if we're talking about what our customers are buying, I don't really see that we need to sort of like push the nut size to be much larger. Now, that said, from a harvest and handling standpoint, it's easier to handle larger ones. So, that's, yeah.
That's a great perspective. I think that's important for people to hear. So, okay. And I just wanted to throw this into is, one time when I was talking to your dad, he said that, you all freely share information because you're passionate and that's just the kind of people you are. But anyone who is receiving information and knowledge and then gets to a point where they have knowledge that they can share or expertise, they should do that. And that's what we're trying to do with branching out, is to bring these stories and education and resources and awareness to the public. And it's just our way of giving back. So I just wanted to thank your dad for kind of inspiring us to start this, because we're not PhDs and we're newer at farming, but there are ways that we can give back and that many people can give back.
Mhm.
So that was.
I'll add to that I've been involved a lot in like apple growing, and so I've sort of like have these little windows into some other industries, and I've seen the people who are more collaborative and who share information end up being more successful than the people who try to isolate themselves and keep their information to themselves. I mean, it really in these, especially these long-lived crops. I love the saying, a rising tide raises all ships. I think that's so true for what we do, or anyone in tree crops, that we all benefit more when we share. And people who, want to like hoard material or hoard information and isolate themselves, they tend to get left behind as the industry grows.
Yeah, and they don't have nearly as much fun.
Right. Yeah, also that. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to just ask you this question. We're going to run out of time shortly, but I thought that you named an annual event at your farm the Chestnut Woodstock, but I do realize now that it was your dad, and that makes a lot more sense. So tell us a little bit about your annual gathering and what that's about, because it's super fun.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Chestnut Woodstock. I'm pretty sure it's my dad's name for it. We just it's the annual harvest party, which is a much more boring name. It does have some other like cute names like Chest Fest, Um,
Yeah.
but anyway, so this harvest party came about. The idea came about 5 or 6 years ago. Good friends of mine, Badger Johnson and Chris Smith of the Southern Ohio Chestnut Company, they wanted to start growing chestnuts in Southern Ohio. They bought a bunch of trees from us and from some other growers, and they're establishing this new orchard. And we were talking about this sort of like this need or this desire to really connect more people, especially in Appalachia, with chestnuts and with that sort of cultural heritage that we've lost in Appalachia, since we haven't had chestnuts, on the landscape for 100+ years. And so, and their thought was, starting this new business, they want people to be familiar with chestnuts so that when their trees are in production, they don't have to start working then to market their crop. People already know what's going on. And so we sort of conceived this idea of this harvest party where, and they help organize it. We have it at our place in one of our
Yeah.
orchards. People come camp out in the orchard for the weekend. They'll arrive typically on Friday night or Saturday morning. Yeah, like I said, camp out. We harvest chestnuts most of the day on Saturday. We'll do a tour of our facility. My dad usually, gives like what I call his chestnut sermon. Um, and then we'll have like a big potluck, and there's usually music around the fire on Saturday night. And then on Sunday, people can either continue to harvest or sort of like trickle away as their schedules allow. And, we pay people to harvest the chestnuts just like we do our normal pickers. We also will do some barter, if people want to like trade, they picked X amount of buckets and they want to exchange it for X amount of chestnut flour or trees or something. We do that as well. So really we're just trying to create this like culture of enthusiasm around chestnuts. We want people to bring their families to the orchard. We want people to just kind of like know what chestnuts are and get excited when it's chestnut season. So that's the whole idea
Yes.
behind the festival.
I love it, and maybe one day we can get there. But I think is it called agritourism is a big thing right now. Where the same thing I said before, people that are in the cities and especially with children that want to get out and see what land is like, and to have little Airbnb nearby and experience it. It's beneficial as a vacation thing, but like you guys are right, it's building awareness of
Mhm.
an industry. So
Speaking of people from the city, we do U-Pick on the weekends during October, and we do have a lot of people that come from the city, and especially Chinese families, maybe
yeah.
people who grew up eating chestnuts in China, but now they're in the US, they're raising their kids in the US, they don't have that connection with chestnuts, but they'll bring their families to the farm and they'll do U-Pick on the weekends. And it's great to see, all these people from the city who come out, and it's really great to see young families and like kids making that association with chestnuts. So yeah, we do that, try to do that through our U-Pick as well as our festival.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, you're helping them to hold on to their heritage in a way. Um, okay, so let's see, we're just maybe gonna run out of time here, but okay, this is easy. Just what's your favorite chestnut recipe?
All right. Well, chestnut pancakes have always been a family favorite. That's something I grew up eating, something I still really enjoy. We make our own chestnut pancake mix. We've been making it with half chestnut flour and half spelt flour. We have a local spelt producer here, so we get flour from him.
Oh, do you? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah.
Okay.
So that's been a good relationship. I've also made pancakes just with chestnut flour. You can make the gluten-free version. Basically, it's I just looked up some gluten-free pancake recipes online and just use chestnut flour, for the flour.
Yes.
So yeah, it's and you can eat them. You can do like the sweet version with the maple syrup. You can do a more savory version with like some Munster cheese or something. So
Yeah.
yeah, pancakes are great.
Oh, that's so good. Well, because at the end of the day, it is a food that we want to eat. So we have to learn to be great chefs using chestnuts.
Right.
Um, so Amy, if there's anything else you'd like to share, let's share it, but also the best way to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think, you covered a lot of the stuff that I would want to say, so I don't really have anything to add other than, I guess I would encourage anyone interested in chestnuts to, again, join these groups, NNGA, CGA, come to meetings. And coming to meetings is the best way to really connect with us. People can also reach me or my dad at the Route 9 Cooperative email address. That's route9cooperative@gmail.com.
Okay.
If we may be slow to respond, but don't worry. We'll try to get to you. But we don't always get to respond right away. But anyway, yeah, the importance of grower groups and connecting with other growers is I can't say that enough.